Good morning, everyone. So we will get started now. We've got lots of really great stuff to share with you, some really great trainers here with you. So welcome to the mental health workshop for the Linkage and Retention group for the East Bay. We will be talking about building therapeutic alliances, suicide prevention, and resources. We have two awesome trainers with us today, Niki Khanna, who is a therapist with Pacific Center, and Rita, who is a training manager with Crisis Support Services of Alameda County. And as you come in, please introduce yourself in the chat with your name, pronouns, organization, and role. Please let us know if your audio and video are separated because we have 3 breakout sessions. So we want to make sure your voice and your video are together. We will also be recording the presentations, but not the breakout groups. So we want you to speak freely in your small groups. And we also want to acknowledge that some of the topics we're talking about today can feel triggering or heavy, emotionally heavy. So please take breaks whenever you want to and take good care of yourself. That's the most important thing. And also, please ask questions and share in the chat as we go along. Dr. Sammy Lubega and ZJ Escoban will be checking the chat and helping us unmute and ask questions of the trainers who are awesome trainers. And so they're willing to take questions as we go. So welcome to everybody. And this is a great chance for you to meet other folks in the mental health world and also each other. The workshop handouts are downloadable on this webpage. So there's a bunch. Jessica's going to put the link into the chat. So this webpage includes a brand new East Bay mental health resource guide. And that is many thanks to our collaborators here. You can see some of the logos here. Cris and Niki shared information from Crisis Support Services and Pacific Center. Leora Meyer shared information from East Bay Community Recovery Project at Lifelong. Mystique Felton and Claudia Rosales shared information from Casa del Sol at La Clínica. And Marina Becerra and Obiel Leva shared information from Contra Costa Behavioral Health. So some really great people collaborate with us on this. Please download the guide and use it. You are not alone. Lots of people out here who are able and willing and wanting to help each other. So these services have also been updated in our online service directory. So all that is, you can look it up and we'll keep it updated in that directory as well. While you're there, if you see some things that need to be updated for your organization, please let us know. And Jessica will put some links into the chat on how you can update your own organization's listing as well. Some other quick updates. Our HIV strategic plan for the East Bay is out in English for this year. And Moises Cruz Jorge is working on the Spanish language plan. So look out for that in the next month. We now have 3 simple guides to finding affordable housing in the East Bay, thanks to Angela Moore and Judy Eliashar. And Judy has just finished volume 2 of Alameda County. So lots of really great information in there. You can download them freely from our website. And as I mentioned, there's a new mental health guide that talks about access, how to refer, and also availability. And actually, there's availability for therapy slots in both Contra Costa and Alameda counties in both English and in Spanish. So please take advantage of that. And then they're also updated in our service directory as well. For those of you new to our group, I just want to give some historical context for our group. There's some really great folks who came together in 2011 who are still part of our group today, which is awesome. Georgia Schreiber, David Greenberg, Teresa Kerrville, Bronze Courtney, Damon Francis, Tony Silliman. A lot of these folks were there at the very beginning when we first looked at our data and were shocked at how low our linkage and our viral load suppression rates were for HIV. So we came together and we knew that we had to address this challenge as a network of collaborators. And this group grew from a tiny handful of people to over 100 met in 2019 to talk about HIV linkages right before the pandemic. So it's just amazing to see how this group has grown and evolved over the years. And during that time, we have started a contact list, which is now our online directory. We also scaled up universal HIV testing, thanks to Lorenzo Hinojosa and a whole host of partners around the county who are also part of this at the beginning. And then also we launched PrEP. Dr. Sammy Lubega is now leading that prevention group, and we've got lots of new leaders in that group as well. So very exciting times. And in 2017, we also launched Rapid ART, and this group started East Bay Getting to Zero and has really grown from there. In many ways, we learned that the HIV medication part was the simplest part, and that actually navigating trauma and stigma were much harder. And so we launched a series of trainings to improve our skills on racial bias, sex positivity, motivational interviewing, trauma-informed care, substance use, housing, and mental health. So this workshop is in the long lineage of addressing trauma, managing, navigating, addressing trauma, and also stigma in our communities and ourselves and in our work and our personal and professional lives. So this is a really rich history that you're all a part of. And the outcomes show the benefits of this, with really great improvements in linkage rates and going from 0 to 93% among our HIV access clinics for rapid ART, and huge improvements in viral load suppression as well. We did go down during the first 2 years of the pandemic in terms of linkage and viral load suppression rates, but we have come up in the most recent data for 2022. So that's hopeful. And I think we can continue to regain some of the lost ground during the pandemic and also continue to improve. In addition to that, this is my last linkage workshop that I will be facilitating as a facilitator, and I will be handing over the torch of this linkage group to some very capable people, the East Bay Getting to Zero core team, Dr. Sammy Lubega, ZJ, who's with us, and also Jessica Price and Sean Demmons of the Bay Area AIDS Education Training Center. Sammy and Jessica have been with this group for many years, so you're in very capable and good hands. And the group will bring new ideas and new energy to the linkage meeting. So stay tuned. There will be more to come in the fall for the next meeting for this group. As part of our HIV strategy, we are actually addressing mental health skills and referrals, which was actually the top vote in our polls on strategic priorities to focus on for this year. So to talk about mental health skills, we'll be starting out with a healing practice with Ramon Jackson. And then ZJ is going to lead us on a networking activity. And Niki Khanna is going to lead us on a training in building therapeutic alliances. And Rita will lead us on a training in crisis de-escalation and suicide prevention. And we're hoping that you will take away at least 2 skills to build a therapeutic alliance with clients, and also 2 ways to prevent suicide and de-escalate crisis situation, as well as new mental health resources to just remind yourself you are not alone, and there are some really great people who are around to help you and help your clients as well. So with that, I'm very pleased to introduce to you to Ramon Jackson. For those of you, many of you already know Ramon is an East Bay Getting to Zero advisory board member, also a community planner, an artist, and a writer. Ramon has also been leading some really beautiful healing practices for us for many years. So we are so grateful and fortunate to have Ramon leading our healing practice, which is so important for today's session. So Ramon, welcome.
Good morning, everyone. I invite you to mute yourself, cut off your cameras, place your bodies, find your bodies in a comfortable but grounded position, making sure that your feet are flat on the floor, that your back is upright and comfortable. Closing your eyes, taking a deep, deep breath, inhaling in till your lungs are full, and exhaling. Today, we're going to do some repeated affirmations. I invite you to repeat these words after me, making sure to breathe in between each statement. I am enough. I am not defined by someone else's expectations of me. I give myself grace and room to evolve as I rediscover who I am. I will be patient with myself as I grow in this process. I'm proud of myself for setting boundaries that express self-love. I will support those I love without sacrificing myself or my peace. I'm not everybody's cup of tea, and that's okay. I love what I have in my cup. I will protect my energy. Other people's opinion about me is none of my business. There's beauty in letting go. I will prioritize my needs before committing to someone else's. I am enough. I am worthy of love and acceptance. I will surround myself with people who have my best interests at heart. Everything I need to feel loved and be loved is inside of me. I accept myself. I see myself. I choose myself. I am enough. Now inhaling deeply. Exhaling out all negativity, making room for these words to grow and plant in your system. We're going to say them one more time. Having an attuned ear, an attuned heart, and breathing as we go. I am enough. I am not defined by someone else's expectations of me. I give myself grace and room to evolve as I rediscover. I will be patient. So as I grow in this process, I am proud of myself for setting boundaries that express self-love. I will support those I love without sacrificing myself or my peace. I'm not everybody's cup of tea, and that's okay. I love what I have in my cup. I will protect my energy. Other people's opinion about me is none of my business. There's beauty in letting go. I will prioritize my needs before committing to someone else's. I am enough. I am worthy of love and acceptance. I will surround myself with people who have my best interest at heart. Everything I need to feel loved and be loved is inside of me. I accept myself. I see myself. I choose myself because I am enough. I invite you to take those words with you today and breathe throughout your day. Ashe.
Thank you, Ramon. Lots of love. All right. So I hope we can take that practice, that feeling in ourselves, and bring that wonderful energy to our time together. Thank you so much. So in the spirit of connecting, so connecting with ourselves right now, and now connecting with each other, I would like to invite ZJ Eskman, who is our community programs manager for East Bay Getting to Zero, to lead us on a networking activity.
Yes. Thanks, Sophie. Hi, everybody. I'm going to be kicking us off with an icebreaker and a networking session. So after we do place you in your breakout rooms, do a round of introductions, share some org updates and resources, please identify a group lead to help take notes throughout your discussion, since we'll be doing a share out at the end of the session via the chat. And some of the questions to help guide the conversation today is: 1, what shows up for you around mental health issues? And 2, what do you hope to learn today? We'll have about 15 minutes for the breakout session, and I think we're ready to go.
Great. Thanks, CJ. All right, we're going to launch.
Welcome back, everybody. So before we introduce the presenter, if you could have your group leader share in the chat some of the themes your group discussed, and we'll go over it before the next presenter presents. And I'll pass it on to you, Sophie.
No problem. Yeah, thank you so much, all. We will actually go back into the small groups later, so you'll have a chance to talk with your folks again. So without further ado, our next trainer is actually going to take what you share out and build it into her training, which is great. So really pleased to introduce you all to Niki Khanna, who is a psychotherapist and educator in the Bay Area. She focuses on working within the queer, trans, and intersex communities and identifies as a femme, intersex, and person of color. She is passionate about finding ways to use the skills she has developed to contribute to the intersex community. Her current projects include training modules for mental health providers, which is perfect for us, and writing a chapter on intersex for a textbook on trauma within the LGBTQIA+ communities. We are super lucky to have Niki bring her expertise as both a therapist and an educator and train us on building therapeutic alliances with clients. So thank you so much for joining us with Niki. Welcome.
Hi, everyone. Hi. So, yeah, I'm not sure if people are able to share from their small groups in the chat. If not, I will sort of have an open discussion for people to be able to share directly to me if they would like to as well. But just to get started, I have some slides I'm going to throw up on the screen. And just to let you all know, once these slides are up, I really can't see people. So putting things in chat is very useful, because then someone, I think CJ, some other folks, Jessica, might be helping sort of, get that information to me, so I know what folks are putting in chat. And then another useful thing is, if you do want to be seen and heard by me, is if you use the raise hand feature on Zoom, your little thumbnail will move up to where I can see you and I can call on you and ask you some things, or at least I can see your face when you start speaking. So those are super helpful things to me. So, so you already got a little introduction from me, and I saw some sort of intros in the chat as folks came in at the beginning. So I got sort of an idea of where people are from, as far as where they're working at and what they're doing. And one of the things I want to highlight is that each of us comes from different places and experiences. And so this is less of a me telling you and more of a me organizing you all communicating with each other as well. Like, I feel like we all share a lot of knowledge here. So just to say that I'm not going to be an expert in this. There are going to be 48, whatever, how many people there are here, experts in the different things that you all work with. So part of the breakout was asking people what it is that they are, like, their major presenting issues. What are the sort of needs that people are coming to them with, regarding mental health needs. And so I'm curious if there's some things in the chat that could be sort of said out loud.
Yeah. We had Marina and her group talk about the need for mental health services at diagnosis for their own experiences. And then from Christian and his group, seeing fear by youth and adult communities, overdose education is shocking to community members, learning about test strips, safety, and hearing about overdose, how to grieve. From Megan and her group, she also talked about serious stigma all around us, and there isn't enough focus on the degree it exists. We don't know how to begin to peel back the onion and get started. From Georgia's group, you want to learn about mental health issues by osmosis because it affects so many of the patients and families with whom we work with, but we can always use more direct training on mental health issues. Layla says stigma and also how to provide effective services when people also lack housing. Ramon mentions meeting the needs of trans and Latinx communities.
So we're not closing off talking about it. I'm actually opening up to see if there's anything else that other people wanted to express, either in the chat or, like I said, directly out loud to me. Also sort of looking at the bullet points I have here, like major presenting issues, i.e. why are people coming to therapy, right? And also issues accessing therapy. And I think some people spoke to this as far as like the lack of housing and homes for some people, and also the lack of like maybe identity specific care, right? Like how do we serve specific communities if we don't have providers that are necessarily in those communities or identify with those communities, and how there could be some access issues that come up with that, right? Like people not feeling comfortable going to somebody who doesn't look and sound and have the experiences they have, etc. Were there other sort of obstacles to care, other things that people wanted to talk about or wanted to discuss that weren't expressed in the sort of readouts from the individual groups?
Yeah, Christian has his hand up.
Hey, thank you. I just want to mention that sometimes it's I guess it's more of an obstacle for providers or for people that that are meeting with different clients. I think just dissolving a lot of information intake and trauma, and trying not to minimize it. And right now I've been just taking notes. I was trying to hear the story as I was taking notes. And I think just a way to probably have more tools for providers, and also not minimizing experiences with clients that come in, let's say, with testing, and it's only like a 10-minute talk, but it's a lot of trauma shared in those 10 minutes, and making sure that people are feeling heard when we do the hand warm off to someone else.
Yeah.
I think, yeah, that's one of the things.
Yeah, and what I'm reflecting and maybe what I'm hearing is that there's also these sort of like process things that have to happen, right? Like, paperwork that needs to be filled out, and like, testing and handoffs, and this person does this part and this person does that part. And for a person who is like having the experience, right? Like the client having the experience, right? Like they aren't you know, they don't need to do like they have to do all of it, right? But it means that they're sort of like getting moved around at a like very tender place for them, right? Like a vulnerable place for them. And there's like all this paperwork and like all these different people. And it gets to be like, this is not, you know, like what is happening right now? And you just, you know, get sort of stuck in that. And what it often does is it makes people sort of like, you know, spill out everything, right? Like they're getting really full and they're sort of like seeing one kind face and it's like, and this is everything. And then that's also a lot for us to take in, right? Like, especially on like a repeated basis, right? You're like, and the next person, and the next person. And so it becomes a lot. So how to sort of like, you know, navigate that gracefully with folks and hold that like this is a vulnerable place for a lot of people, regardless of how much they might be like, you know, even, you know, having enough of the time to know that this is a vulnerable experience, right? Like they're sort of in it when it's happening to them. And so, yeah. So yeah, and so I think there's someone else put in the chat as well that it's difficult to hold, right? To like be with and support folks when they might not necessarily be up for like therapy, right? Like that is its own sort of thing, but how to be supportive, right? In that environment when a person might not want like therapy, right? But how to like show up for people. So, and also like, yeah, there's a lot of things around trauma. And there is a certain trauma of dealing with, for lack of a better word, bureaucracy, paperwork, forms, like going to see somebody, like all of that has its own sort of, you know, trauma with it, right? This like idea that somebody else has like power and control over you because of these things can feel very difficult, right? It makes it harder to feel vulnerable in those spaces, right? And to accept care, right? Because you don't know if it's safe to like allow yourself to be cared for in those places. And also holding that like it might not be completely safe for people, right? Like I don't live in the fantasy that all of the places that we all work at or like serve clients at are always going to be 100% safe and comfortable for them to be at, right? We want it to be that, but we also know that that can't always be true, right? So were there other things that folks sort of had as far as like obstacles to care, things that they see like in those spaces? Okay, that's not the end of it, but I'm gonna sort of like move into the next phase, right? So there is this concept of a therapeutic alliance, right? And that is this thing that I'm here to talk about. But one of the things I also want to say is that you don't have to be a therapist to create a sense of alliance with someone, right? And so although these are things that are sort of basic markers, right? If you are a therapist or a like that sort of care provider, but if you have sort of any interaction, right, with someone, regardless of like what your positionality, whether you are a therapist or a social worker or someone who offers that care, or if you are, you know, another place in that person's journey, right? That these are ways to sort of build rapport, right? Or alliance with people, right? And so ways to sort of get people to be able to like have some sense of safety and comfort with you, right? Holding again that like no one's ever going to be completely safe in a place, and holding and respecting that, right? So the first part of it is like building a sense of trust, care, and respect. And a lot of that can be done through being transparent as possible, right? Like holding that like, this can be a very sort of like scary, for lack of a better word, like it's an adjustment period, right? Like this is a transition for a period. This is a time when people need some transparency, right? They need to know that like what is going on, what the process will look like, right? So they don't just feel like they're blindly being passed along or being expected to show up to do something and they don't know why, right? Like, why am I being referred to a therapist? Why am I being told I need this, right? So to sort of say, right, to be transparent around it, right? And say like, hey, a lot of people find, other people in your situation have found this to be helpful. Maybe you will, maybe you won't. Maybe there's some other things that we can find for you that are helpful if like direct therapy is not the thing for you, right? But to be transparent, right? And also in that transparency, right, to help them understand, right, that there are goals here and that they get to guide what those goals are. And I think that that's a really important thing. What I'll say is that a lot of schools of thought on therapy are that the therapist has one goal, and the client might have another. And I don't think that that is helpful, accurate, good in any way. I understand that there is a hierarchy, right, because of our roles in this, but I want to sort of move that to be as close to you know, each other as possible. And part of that is like letting the clients, right, letting that person decide what their goals are, right, deciding what their needs are and what they would like to do, right? And so I can have some thoughts on it, but I share those thoughts and we talk about them and have agreed upon goals for what we're doing. And again, it not just in a therapeutic sense, right, but in all of the sort of like places in which we have interactions with people. Right, so whether it be like setting up a different sort of care plan for themselves as far as like medication goes, or like other sort of healthcare needs or outside of healthcare needs, right? Like talking to them about like what they need and helping establish some goals for them, like in like agreement to each other, right? Like we decide collaboratively about what that is. And again, so that's the collaboration on the work, right? Like we're going to work on this together, not like I decide what needs to happen and then I assign you this work, quote unquote, to do. It really makes people, that's one of the reasons people can be very resistant to therapy, right? And I mean that in like the universal word of resistance, not the therapeutic idea of resistance, right? But the idea that like I'm going to decide what's wrong with you and then I'm going to tell you what you need to do about it, really makes people not want to engage with what's going on. And if what our goals are really to be helpful to people, then we need to take a step back, right? And like let them decide what they need, right? Even if we think in our head they need something different, like, you know, we need to think about like, why am I thinking about that, right? And assess all the ways in which we are showing up in a space and think about like why I might have a different idea and this is their lived experience and I should be on board with what they feel they need as much as possible, right? And so were there other things that people find are helpful in building rapport and alliance with people that they work with, whether it's a therapeutic setting or not? Folks can put it in the chat or just say it out loud or do the raise hands, whatever works for them.
Hi, this is Catalina from
Hi.
Crisis Support. Hi. I think one of the things that help, I'm not a therapist, but I've been a social worker for a long time. And what I think it really helps is to have somebody that you share, you know, that you share culture. In my experience, you know, somebody that speak your language, somebody that understand our cultural, you know, I call it traditions, you know, because we come from a very traditional culture and is evolving, and you know, I acknowledge that, but in my past experiences it's been really helpful to support somebody that is, you know, filling out forms or getting new information with a language that they feel comfortable with, a person that understands how they're feeling, you know. So
yeah, no, I mean, I absolutely agree. I mean, it's one of the reasons I work with queer, trans, and intersex folks, right? It's because there is, for like within that community, there's a place in which like those folks come to me and they don't have to explain certain things because we share this sort of like cultural background, right? It's not the same, right, as like an ethnic or religious or racial background, but it is still a sense of cultural background that you don't have to explain to somebody, right? And also holding that, like, sometimes that isn't possible. And our work in like this role is to try as much as possible to lean in to like knowing I don't know these things. What can I learn to be helpful to this person without burdening them to like teach me all the things that I need to know in order to work with them, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, so like holding like the reality is there just isn't enough providers that are in the same sort of like identity groups as most people we might be working with. It's like a sad reality to the work, right? But to try as much as possible to meet people in that place. Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and so someone put in the chat that it's there are some issues, and I'll speak a little bit to this, but there's issues working with people who use substances and they're not ready to address that, right? They're in the like not even pre-contemplative stage, right? And so they're not even in this track yet to look at it, right? And you know, I absolutely worked with folks around those things, right? And so, and I tend to frame those things as like self-soothing behaviors, right? They're not currently working as that, right? They're doing something else, right? But it is a way in which a person is trying to take care of themselves. And sometimes when I gently refer to their sort of substance use as a way that they're taking care of themselves, and then can work into the place of like, so why is it that you need to take care of yourself, right? Let's talk about that part of it. And sometimes like sort of massaging that part of it, like, you know, aligning with people around like, yeah, you know, there are some parts of your life that are really not great. And I totally get that, like, you need to do something to take care of yourself. Like, let's talk about those things that are happening for you. And then that might gently move people into the place of like, oh, okay, this might be why I'm doing that, right? So, because I think going at it too directly sometimes can it's like taking away that thing that they use to take care of themselves, and then it leaves them very vulnerable feeling. And again, getting back to like what it is to be vulnerable in these spaces, it can be really, really hard, right? Like most people, I'm assuming, are not coming to you by choice, right? They're coming to you by circumstance, as opposed to like, you know, like somebody who's like, I just want to work on life goals and that's why I'm going to therapy. That's a different sort of setup than someone who is like coming and needing support around, you know, this thing, right, that has happened for them, right? This transition, this change in their life, this sort of like, you know, there's a difference in that, right? And so sometimes, you know, saying I'm going to take away the thing that you're using to take care of yourself can be hard, right? Were there other, you know, parts around the Therapeutic Alliance I want to touch on before sort of move into the like similar space? The next sort of
just going back to some of the earlier things in the chat, I'm wondering if you would be willing to talk about how to hold that safe space in a short visit where you have competing priorities. I think Christian mentioned, you know, we have short 10-minute visits sometimes, or we just don't have enough time to really be there and fully listen to somebody who, especially somebody who's spilling over a lot of stuff, because it's a very traumatic and scary time. So how do we, what do we prioritize? What can we say to establish some trust and safe space when we don't have very much time to do that?
I mean, I think part of it is like holding, right? This is very vulnerable, like validating for a person. This is hard. You know, maybe you don't want to use the word vulnerable because that might not be the word they feel. It describes what's going on for them, right? But validating, like, this is hard. This is not great in whatever language seems to align with them, right? So for some people, it might be like, man, this sucks. And for another person, it's like, this is really difficult, right? Like this is stressful, right? So whatever, as much as you can, meet them in the place that they're using to describe what's going on for them, right? Knowing that like you can never create ultimate safety for them, but what you want to do is sort of like soften up the edges. And one of the things that is useful to both them and you is knowing that although you might only have 5 or 10 minutes, it still can have an impact on a person. Because sometimes we feel very, frustrated, right? With the fact that like we get such a short amount of time with people, but sometimes people can remember the smallest amounts of like care, right? And a big way of caring is listening, right? To be available to people and to let them feel bad, right? To take care of ourselves, right? So that we don't rush to make people feel better, right? Because sometimes that can feel very invalidating, right? To say like, oh, but we have all these services for you, or but, oh, there's all these things we can do for you. And to like be with them in that short amount of time and say, yeah, this is not great, right? Like this is rough. And I hold that this is rough. And maybe I haven't had that exact same experiences as you, but really I've sat with a lot of people who've had this same experience. I know it's rough. I've had other rough experiences without, not making it about you, but saying like, this is hard, validating for people that this is a hard thing, and holding for yourself and for them that sometimes that small amount of kindness is a thing that people can really remember, right? Like think about the sort of like affirmations that Ramon did earlier, right? They're simple affirmations, right? We repeated them, right? But they're very impactful, right? I saw many people say like, oh, I really needed that, or like people expressing it, right? So that small thing, right? Remember how impactful that was for us here, right? If we like participate and we're here for it, right? Then those small affirmations, those small like validations can also be very impactful for people that you're working with, right? Let me check the chat. Okay.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, of course. So I'm going to move into the next part, knowing that I want to kind of keep us on time, but it doesn't mean, that there's nothing that we can't all speak to, right? So, so the next part that I often hear from people who work with this sort of like umbrella population, knowing that there's like many identities under that, is a sense of hopelessness or fatalism, right? Depending on the population, they might frame it differently, think of it differently. But I have heard a lot of people say in the past that it can be not only hopeless for us at times, but many times folks have a sense of hopelessness or fatalism. And one of the things, knowing that we're doing there's a section later with Christina Rita around suicidality, right? Being able to parse out for yourself as a provider the differences between that sort of sense of hopelessness and fatalism and when it might be more serious and more suicidality, right? So, so sort of giving a sense of what is hopelessness, and also wanting to hear from other people, right, around the ways in which you might have seen this. These are like sort of the key bullet points of what it might look like, but it can have very specific looks for different people, right? So, so hopelessness, fatalism, etc. It can look like a lot of signs of depression, a lot similar sort of things, right? It's like a flavor of that, right? So it's things like oversleeping, like a sort of why bother kind of attitude, isolating, right? Like not wanting to be with others for various reasons, right? Like this is hard to talk about. Now I have this thing I might need to tell people, right? Or like, I don't want to keep talking about this all the time. That's what people are interested in. Or just the sheer sense of like, now this person knows this about me and what does that mean, how they think about me, right? Like that sort of isolating of like, it's just easier not to be around people, right? What are quote unquote risk-taking behaviors? Again, I might couch some of these things as soothing behaviors, right? Or sort of like no longer caring kind of behaviors, like what's the point? Sort of concept behind some sort of behaviors. So there's like substance addictions, and then there's like things called behavioral addictions. And that might look like things like around eating or not eating, or like gambling, right? Things that have to do with like the way a person acts as opposed to like a substance involved, right? And again, I sort of couch those as self-soothing behavior, but also with a like, I know this is not the greatest, but like what am I supposed to do, right? This sort of like who caresness of it. So I'm curious if other people have seen this and what it might look like when you sort of come upon it. So these might be things that are sort of more apparent if you work with people longer than that initial like few minutes. Anybody?
I can share that I think this happens often with my patients who I work with in primary care, where we're sort of working towards big healthcare goals. And I realize that it's hard for them to really be aligned with me around reaching towards that goal. That's going to take numerous steps. That's going to take months or maybe even years to really get to a final place with. And I notice that when they start bringing up those thoughts and feelings, I do also, as a clinician, jump to, wow, do we actually need to stop and completely shift into, a suicidality assessment and really making sure they're safe? Or do I just sort of hold these feelings with them and trust that they're not actively suicidal and that we're just going to like be in those feelings? And so, yeah, that's been a really tough one for me to navigate often.
Yeah, I mean, and I think part of the difference, and I put it like if it's persistent and severe, right? So persistent and severe hopelessness can lead to suicidality, right? And my understanding is there'll be a better assessment than that of suicidality later. But my sort of part was to sort of like say that like hopelessness is a real thing. Fatalism and hopelessness is a real thing that people present with, and to sort of build a tolerance to that as a provider to a certain degree, right? So that it doesn't make you so uncomfortable that you assume it's suicidality, right? You can do some check-ins, right, about what it is. But what I would say is like, if you're setting long-term goals and a person doesn't seem a long-term life for themselves, right? It might, activate in them, I don't want to say trigger, that's a very big word, but it might activate them this sense of like, well, why am I bothering? Right? Like, what is the point in doing all this work? Right? And healthcare work can sometimes not be fun and can feel like a restriction, right? Even therapeutic work can feel not fun, right? Like people are like, why do I feel so terrible after therapy? I'm like, oh, because it's work. And so, right? And people can feel really like, why bother? Right? And I think part of it is like really like addressing that, like, yeah, I get it. Right? Like maybe I don't have the same experience as you, but like, why bother? Let's talk about, right? Like why you might want to bother, right? You should appear, right? Like some part of you brought you into this room to show up to do this. So some part of you hasn't completely given up. So let's like think about what that part did. Like, what was it that got you here to do that? Right? Is there enough energy in that place for you to try some things, right? What is like the lowest threshold we can try for this, right? And not, knowing that like maybe they won't be on board for the whole gambit of things, but like, okay, let's look at like what's the lowest threshold thing we can get you to do, right? That you might have energy for, some part of you might have the, ability to show up for. And like, what can we do to like support that part of you that's like interested in showing up and doing things, right? Like, and basically being like, okay, let's give support, right, to those parts of you that want to help, and like find ways to soothe the parts of you that are like, oh, why bother, right? Like like validate those parts of them and also like offer some sort of like, okay, so what can we do to take care of that part, right? Not to ignore it, but to sort of take care of it, right? That aspect of you or that part of you or whatever the words are that work for that client and the way in which you frame working, right? So I do parts work. I talk about parts of people, but not everyone does that, right? And so, yeah, so like looking at that, right? And saying like, okay, and knowing, right, that like if you are seeing someone like consistently show up in this way of like, and it gets like worse and worse and like more and more hopeless and they're not like showing up for things, and then I would, you know, then look into the like suicidality assessment, like talk to them about things, right? And like move into that, the next portion around that. So were there anything else, knowing that we're sort of coming up on the last few minutes here and I want to sort of get us back into time. So were there other things that people have seen around like hopelessness or fatalism that shows up for folks? And thank you so much for bringing in something. Let's see, I think I see in chat. Yeah, so some people are also, you know, speaking to like physical health, right? That like it wasn't something that people were like wanting to take care of, right? And I get that, right? If you're like, well, why bother, right? And so not only like supporting that parts of them that want to show up and try to do something, but also finding like some support and resourcing for the parts of them, the aspects of them that are like, ugh, why bother? Right? So it's both and, right? And to not like lean too heavily in the like, rah, let's do the thing, right? Because sometimes that feels like you're not hearing me tell you how hard this is, right? So like validating like, yeah, this is hard, right? Like, yes. And so, yeah. So, you know, people who are caught in cycles of poverty, cycles of like, it is hard, like, there might not be a big part of you, right, that can show up to do things if you don't have like basic needs met, right? And that might be the most important thing to like help a person with, if you are able to, knowing that all of us are stuck in the system that doesn't offer a lot of support around that, right? And you know, one of the things that I like try to like hold as much as possible is that you know, we can do so much on the individual level, but to work as much as we can on the larger framework level, right? Because that is the place that's going to prevent that individual from showing up for me, right? So personal burnout as like a therapist or a care worker is getting stuck in this place of like, okay, I patched up this one person and sent them on as much as I could, and then sent them on, and another person showed up and I patched them up and sent them on, and it becomes this like draining cycle of like, and so like putting as energy that you might have into helping stop as much as possible the systems that create that, right? And so, I mean, this whole networking system is that work, right? Like this is a bigger system trying to like, you know, it was formed, it sounds like, to like take care of that, right? So it's not always on this individual level, but to help offer support for that, right? And to keep with that. Yeah. So it looks like there's some more helpful information in the chat. So so I just want to say we have just a few minutes left, right? And I want to like keep us on board. So there's some, I'm from the Pacific Center, or I don't work there, but I am sort of an educator and a consultant through them. So, so there's some resourcing that is available, mental health resourcing through the Pacific Center. If you need to offer some support to people, there are, you know, different classes around grief. That's a real thing, or like groups, not classes, but like facilitated support groups around grief. There is individual and like couples psychotherapy and counseling. There's lots of groups. So nearly every night of the week, there's a different group for a different sort of identity group. And some people might fall into more than one, right? There are groups specifically for folks who are living with HIV, right? So there are like lots of layers of supportive groups, right? So like direct therapy isn't a thing, or it isn't accessible right now for a person. There could be some groups that people can join, etc. So, and some other resources, right, that the Pacific Center has to do, and other sort of East Bay resources. These are probably like, you probably have even bigger lists than that. And I don't feel like people don't have an understanding of the things that are available to them in this group. This feels like probably redundant information for you. But yeah, just to say, we have about 2 minutes left, or maybe less. But my contact information is on here if there's anything else people needed from me or wasn't covered in this workshop well enough. And then if there's anything people need in before we move on to the next thing before. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Niki. We have also the other mental health, East Bay mental health resources in the mental health resource guide that you can download from that webpage. Jessica, do you mind putting that in the chat again, where the handouts are?
Yeah.
So
no
you
problem.
guys, you all can see all the different collaborating mental health organizations that have specialized in therapy and mental health services for people living with HIV, and they're primarily bilingual, Spanish and English. So there's a lot of resources. There are actually open slots right now in both Alameda County and Contra Costa counties. And I'm wondering, for those of you from those organizations, are you also open to like questions that come up? For example, if our clients are not willing to go to therapy, but as peers, as like coworkers, if we have questions and need help figuring out how to support somebody through something when they're not able or willing to go to therapy, is that something that you all are open to as well? And that would be anybody like Leora from EBCRP, Niki, I guess questions for you.
I mean, what I want to say is, although I am a therapist, I do hold that like there's so many other ways people can receive support, right? Like whether it be like through a meditation group, or like fellowship with a religious practice, or like any sort of like place in which people can like find support, even if it isn't directly about the thing that they're coming to you for, but they just have a thing where they get to be with others. Right? So like just being with others is supportive in and of itself. So like finding some way in which people can like be with others, whatever that looks like for them. It doesn't have to be like one-on-one, like individualized therapy. Yeah.
Great, thanks, Niki. And April has some helpful resources and questions in the chat if you guys want to check it out, the assist training, and then some questions to ask. Some tough questions to ask people to get to the heart of what's going on. Marina also shared, actually had a question around how to move forward when somebody has a lifetime of regrets. Niki, wondering if you have any thoughts about that. If somebody gets stuck in a lifetime of regrets, how do you work with that?
I mean, I think that some of it can be working with the negative self talk, right? We do a lot of that, like I am that, and also holding that like we can change and be different, right? So if you have things you feel like you need to make amends for, like looking into what amends looks like for people, and also like holding like you get to be a different person, right? Yeah. And so yes, and so like anything that sort of speaks to, I'm like guessing to the things in the chat because I can see them, but yes, anything where you can like speak to the place of like you get to be a different person, you get to make new decisions, you are not based solely on the worst part of you, right? Like you get to be somebody else in this. And then also finding some supportive practices, right, that can help remind people of that, right? So it's not just a one-time hearing it from me or in this space, but like finding community and supportive places that remind you, right? Like finding other important people in the world who have done regrettable things and have made new choices, right? That's a hard thing to find, but there are people who have done that, right? And have changed. And so showing that like it is a possibility, right? Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. And Ramon shared Dharma Recovery as a great resource for those seeking space meditation recovery. So some great resources in there. And we're lucky, actually, there's a lot in the Bay Area. And
Absolutely.
as things are virtual too, there's hopefully more access for people who are kind of not in the city center too. So yeah, thank you all for these really great resources and pieces of guidance. And Niki, thank you for all of your expertise too.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. Anything else before we go to break? That's great. Really wonderful questions, really great guidance and expertise, Niki. We really appreciate you just really holding space for our questions and what we're wondering about.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much for participating so fully. Yeah.
Yeah. Big shout out. Thank you to Niki. Yay. Thank you all. Jessica, you want to bring us to our break and we will come back? Yeah. Thank you, everybody. Lots of hearts and lots of claps. So awesome.
Great. We're going to do a quick 5-minute break, and I'm going to show some chair yoga that you are, welcome to do or skip. So here we go.
Hey yogis, and welcome to Alabama Yoga. Join me in this 5-minute gentle chair yoga for beginners. All you need is a chair. Plant your feet firmly into the floor, and as you sit at the edge of your chair, make sure that the knees are directly above the ankles and that the knees are in line with the hips. Sit up tall, lengthen the spine. Inhale through the nose, lift your arms up, and as you exhale through the nose, let your arms come all the way down. Let's do that again. Inhale through the nose, arms are coming all the way up. Exhale through the nose, let your arms come all the way down. Wonderful. Continue to mirror me for the following flow. With your left hand, hold on to your chair, ground down through your sitting bones. Inhale, reach your right arm up towards the sky. Exhale, hold. Inhale, reach up, lengthen the spine, and exhale, side body bend to the left side. Keep breathing. And you might have to adjust your left hand on the chair, higher or lower, whatever works best for you and your range of motion. Keep grounding through your right sitting bone. And then inhale, come back to center. Exhale, release. Right hand on a chair. Inhale, reach your left arm up. Exhale, hold. Inhale, lengthen the spine. Exhale, side body bend to the right side. Again, reposition your right hand. You can go lower, higher. Keep rooting down through your sitting bones, especially the left one. And inhale, come back to center. Exhale, release. Inhale, bring your arms up at shoulder height. Then bend the elbows and hold on to your shoulders with your hands. Exhale. Draw circles with your elbows. Doesn't matter which direction, we'll do both sides. Do a few more. Keep breathing. And then switch direction. Relax everything else you don't need right now. Relax your face, relax your jaw. Stay connected with your breath. Well done. And lower your hands down. Place your hands on your thighs. Inhale, reach your right arm up and gently hold on to your head with your right hand. Exhale, right ear goes to your right shoulder. Keep breathing and release any tension on the exhales in this neck stretch. Take one more deep breath. And then with your right hand, gently push your right cheek back to center and then switch sides. Inhale, reach your left arm up, hold on to your head. Exhale, left ear goes to your left shoulder. Keep breathing, keep working with your breath, letting go of any tension and stress in the neck. Relax your face and relax your jaw. Last deep breath. And then with your left hand, gently push your left cheek back to center. Release your hand down. And let's get ready for a seated twist. Keep your hip bones facing the front. Inhale, reach your arms up, and as you exhale, twist your chest to the left side. Right hand comes down to your left knee, and with your left hand, hold on to your chair. Keep your spine nice and long, and slightly look over your left shoulder. Keep grounding through your feet. And inhale, reach your arms up, switching sides. Exhale, twist to the right. Place your left hand on your right knee, and with your right hand, hold on to your chair. Again, keep grounding through your feet and sitting bones, and the hip bones are facing the front. Gently look over the right shoulder. Take a few deep breaths. Twists are great to keep mobility in the spine and to gently massage our internal organs. Inhale, come back to center, reach your arms up, and as we exhale, start folding forward from the hips. Drop your head down. With your hands, hold on to your lower legs, ankles, feet, or place your hands on the floor. Take a few deep breaths and relax your neck. Take one last deep breath in this forward fold. And then place your hands on your legs, walk yourself all the way up so you're sitting up tall. Relax your shoulders away from the ears, and let's close our chair yoga flow together. Inhale, reach your arms up towards the sky. Exhale, join your hands together, draw your hands down in prayer position in front of your heart. Thank you so much for practicing with me. And may this yoga practice be a blessing to you. Namaste.
Jessica, ZJ, are we ready to come back from break?
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, great. Welcome back, everyone. Thanks so much for sticking with us. And we are going to move to our next training module. So I think a lot of you brought up questions around how to be there for people who are spilling over, who are having lots of feelings around trauma and just like the whole process of a scary moment. And so we are very lucky to have somebody who's an expert in dealing with crises and also in suicide prevention. Rita is our next trainer, and Christina has worked with Crisis Support Services of Alameda County since 2005 and has held staff positions as a crisis line volunteer, counselor, supervisor, and trainer. She has taken over 11,000 calls on the crisis line, so lots of really deep experience with this. She is now a community training manager and trains organizations and community groups on mental health first aid, suicide assessment, and interventions. We are super fortunate to learn from Cris and her expertise and experience in supporting people through crisis situations and suicide prevention. So big warm welcome to Christina. Thanks so much for joining us.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. I don't know about any of you, but I'll just own it for myself. I love doing the chair yoga. That was so nice, and I so totally needed it. So thank you for that. And thank you, Niki, for all of the great information you presented during your portion. And thank you for the intro as far as talking about hopelessness, and this is really helpful. We're going to be talking about today, in this next few minutes, suicide. That's a very difficult subject that can bring up a lot of very tender feelings for folks. And so please take care of yourself. If you need assistance, please call the suicide crisis line at, I'm going to put it in the chat. At 988, I can't type and write, sorry. If you need support during this or after, please call the suicide crisis line at 988. And that's always a resource for you and for everyone else that you work with. Okay, so let's get started. I have a lot of content, and I really don't care about the content as much as I care about your questions and your comments. So I invite you to please feel free to ask questions in the chat, make comments, share information. All of that is helpful for everyone that's here. We learn best from each other and our experiences. So I invite you to do that. I'm a pretty low-key presenter. I don't mind being interrupted. I don't mind you asking questions. So please feel free to do that. But let's get started. What are we going to do today? We're going to talk a little bit about de-escalation. And you've kind of talked about that because one of the first keys about de-escalation is rapport. Building that alliance, that therapeutic alliance with a client. And that goes a long way in helping to de-escalate things when someone is really upset. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. We'll talk about what is suicide prevention. What is that? That's a big question, right? And the truth is as I've been reading the chat this morning, I realized that actually you guys have answered that to some, you all have answered that to some extent. Then I'm going to introduce you to 5 steps that you can take to help someone who is suicidal. This is a national media campaign, sort of, for lack of a better word. It's called Be the One To. And we'll talk about the 5 things that you can do for anyone that's suicidal. Okay, and that can be helpful. And then we'll talk just briefly about self-care. And if we run out of time, that's the part we won't talk about because we've already sort of talked about that. So, so there's a lot that we're going to be talking about. So let's talk first. Let's start with crisis de-escalation. What does that mean, to de-escalate a crisis? You know, it's interesting because when I started on the crisis line, I had no idea. I mean, I had no idea what I was in for. I assumed, wrongly, by the way, that every call would be these horribly suicidal people that we would be intervening with. But the reality is, a lot of times what we intervened with more often were people just having a really hard time. And sometimes those folks were really hard to rein in, if you will, to like get to be able to talk to, because they were in a crisis. And in order to talk about the crisis, we had to actually be able to talk to them. And sometimes when people are in a crisis, it's really hard. So what can you do when you're with someone and it's hard to contain them? It's hard to bring them in. It's hard to even find out what's going on. So the first thing is use your empathy. That's the big one, right? And this also, the empathy piece and the non-judgmental piece go along perfectly with the therapeutic alliance. It's interesting to me, I thought a therapeutic alliance had to be made over years and months and all of that in therapy, but the truth is, you can begin to create an alliance with someone the moment you say hello. So when a person would call on the crisis line, the alliance was already built, beginning to be built, when they got the recording that they get when they call the crisis line, that you've reached the crisis line, and this call may be monitored for quality assurance and training purposes, right, or something like that. And that's when the alliance is built. Now, actually, that's kind of a hindrance to alliance because people sometimes feel uncomfortable with that. But really, it's a way of building that alliance. And so from the moment you say hello to that person or they reach out to you is when that therapeutic alliance is going to be built, and our empathy should be brought into play, and that non-judgmental piece. I love a perfect empathic statement that Brené Brown uses is, I don't even know what to say right now, but I'm glad you told me about what was going on. We sometimes don't know. We don't have the same experiences, but being able to acknowledge that and hold that for someone can be really helpful to begin to de-escalate the situation. One of the other things, well, I'll get there. Also, be aware, be mindful of personal space. I always like to sit down when someone is escalated and I'm in person with them. I find it helpful to sit down and invite them to sit down with me. Would you like to sit down? And sometimes people say, no, I don't want to sit down because they're pacing or they're agitated. That's okay. You can stay seated rather than in the kind of more of a confrontational space. If you're going to be with someone, mind the space. Find a comfortable space away from them that they don't feel that their personal space is being encroached upon. Be able to, if you have to enter their personal space, let them know why you're doing it. So maybe you need a form signed or you need, something done. Let them know and explain why you're doing this. This will help people feel less confused and frightened about what's going on. Remember, when someone is in a crisis, they're often also very frightened. They're scared because things are out of control and they feel out of control. Okay, a lot of people do, not everyone, but a lot of folks do. Use non-threatening nonverbals. Now, what does that mean? I love that sentence, non-threatening nonverbals. Okay, so what that means basically is watch your gestures. As you've already noticed, I use my hands. When I'm with someone who's in a crisis, I tend to want to mind my hands. I want to keep them still. I want to keep my fidgeting still. I want to watch my tone of voice. And a lot of times people might be yelling at you in the crisis situation. So what I have found to be most effective in situations like that is to speak softly, speak gently, and take my time. I don't have to rush my words. I can give people enough space to think about what I'm saying and to hear me. Oftentimes what happens is when I lower my voice, mind my fidgeting, mind me, basically, they then have an opportunity to check in with themselves. Tone of voice is really important. Keep your tone of voice as neutral as you can. Okay, that will keep things in a more even keel. Use more neutral language. Try not to use, I hate to use the word triggering, but kind of, that's a good word for it though, triggering language, be careful with that. And this all goes a long way to diffusing the situation. I sometimes think that the physicality of it is one of the main de-escalation techniques. Watching your facial expressions, watching your fidgeting, giving people personal space, speaking more softly, all of those things can be really helpful. The other thing that can be really helpful is if someone is agitated and in a crisis, try your best not to overreact. Maybe I've had this happen on the crisis line numbers of times. They're yelling at you. They're not really yelling at you, by the way. They're not really trying to be difficult. They're experiencing their crisis. And so they tend to use behaviors and language that can be sometimes very offensive. We don't have to put up with that, by the way. We can set limits around that. But we also need to avoid that overreacting. If we're going to set a limit, let's do it appropriately. Remain as calm as you can. Sometimes if it's someone you care about, it's hard to remain calm. Be rational, be professional. Remember, you can't control that person's behavior. We just don't have that power. We can control our behavior and our reactions, and that's what we need to be able to do. And that will have a direct effect on if the situation escalates further or begins to de-escalate. Focus on feelings. They may talk about, someone in a crisis may talk about lots of other things that are going on, but try to bring them back to, what are you feeling right now? What's happening for you right now in this moment? Acknowledge how this must be feeling for them. This must be really scary for you. I can't imagine how this must feel for you. But bring it back to the feelings that they have. Let them know that although you may not have had the same experience, you can tell that they're feeling really vulnerable and scared right now. And acknowledge that for them. Ignore challenging questions. This is often when they give those kind of challenging questions, it becomes a power struggle. Redirect the question to what you can talk about right now, how you can collaborate to solve the problem. That's where you always want to go. So you might say something like, let's focus on what's happening right now. We don't need to get into all this other stuff that's coming up. We can talk about that later when things settle down. Set limits. If the person's behavior is belligerent or offensive, disruptive, give them clear, simple, enforceable limits about what you can do. Give them choices. So speak simply, be clear, offer positive choices first. So you might say something like, I understand you're upset right now, but it's not okay to speak to me like that. Can you take a breath and let's continue our conversation? or let's us take a breath, take a moment, gather ourselves, and let's continue the conversation. Choose really wisely what you insist upon, especially if the person is suicidal. You want to have options and flexibility, but you also have to recognize that the person may be at risk for taking their life. And so you want to make sure that they understand that the most important thing is keeping them safe. And so you want to give them very limited options. So you might want to say something like, who can we call to help support you if there is support you? And if there is no one you can think of, are you willing to go to the hospital? Okay. Sometimes when someone is at high risk for suicide, the hospital is the right answer, even though it's not ideal. It may be the right answer. And so when we're having those kinds of conversations with someone, we want to give people choices. So it might look like something like this. So it's really important for me to keep you safe. It's really important for you to be safe because we care about you. Okay. So is there someone you can go stay with while you're feeling like this? Or is there someone we can call to come over and stay with you? Have that conversation. If there isn't anyone, then we have to have the conversation about, well, maybe the right choice right now is for you to go to the hospital so that you can be safe. This would be someone who is at high risk for suicide, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes, okay?
Cris, there's a question in the chat around calling somebody who might care about them. Kim, correct me if I'm wrong. Calling somebody that's, say, not a healthcare provider, I'm imagining, but maybe like somebody who's in the friend or family circle. Is that okay for us to do, just given HIPAA regulations and privacy regulations? Do you know?
Yeah, I don't know for sure, but how I would go about that would be talk about it with my client, talk about it with the person you're working with, and then have them make that phone call. One of the things that happens when someone is suicidal, they feel that they have no power, they have no control. This gives them, by having them make that phone call, you being with them while they make that phone call, but having them make that phone call gives them some power and control back in their life. So let them make the call, let them determine how much. You can also get a release from the client or from the person to speak to someone. And that, that's something that you can do as well. But I think it's better if you talk about it with them and say, okay, let's call that person and talk to them about it. Let's see if they're available, and have the client actually call and make that phone call, and you be right there with them to support them in making that call. Okay. And then that kind of sort of gets around the HIPAA stuff. All right.
Thanks, Cris. There's also a related question from Alexander around at some point, if we decide that the person needs the safety of the hospital, would it be more appropriate to ask a family member to drive them, or call 911 for 5150 or a private ambulance? Do you have thoughts on how that can play out?
I do. And we'll talk more about it later on, but I'll address it right now just because it's up. When we talk about the hospital, at as much as we possibly can, it's my personal opinion. It's also statistically better for people, treatment-wise, if they voluntarily go to the hospital. So that could mean you could drive someone, if that's within the scope of something that you can do. You can have a family member take them. Those are the best choices. I would prefer not to have folks have to be intervened with emergency personnel or the police department. Sometimes there is no other way, and we have to call 911 and have someone come out and do the intervention with us. If that is the case, the most important thing is that you let your client know what's going to happen next, that the police are going to come, they're going to ask you some questions, they may want to pat you down. If you're a person of color, that can be very triggering. It can be very triggering for everyone, but oftentimes with people of color, it's more triggering. People with non-binary or transgender folks, that can be really difficult for as well. So those are some of the reasons we may not want to involve police. Calling for private ambulance, yes, if they have medical insurance, keep in mind that that's costly when we do that. So for some folks, that might be a real hindrance and another additional trauma that they may experience when they get the bill. So the ideal situation is they have someone in their life, whether it's family member or friend, or, you know, another support person, that they can bring them into it, and they can then take them to the hospital. However, we don't hesitate if we have to call the police to keep someone safe. Okay.
Yeah, and Alexander says that was their instinct as well, as a former transport medic, seeing a lot of unwilling people be transported to the ER at their own cost. So
yeah,
Alexander, thanks you for the clarity on that.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm glad you brought it up, because it is important to keep in mind. So if we can get them, ideally, the situation is if we can get them to go voluntarily, someone can take them there, that's ideal. That's the best way. Okay, so, and again, this goes back to choosing wisely what you insist upon. Give people options and flexibility, but be really firm about if someone is at risk for suicide and they have the means and they're in that space right now, that you're going to give them very limited options. Okay. Sometimes when there's silence, people want to fill it. Just right then, I was like, oh, you know, let me talk. Silence is powerful. It's okay to be quiet. It gives you an opportunity to think. It also gives the person an opportunity to slow down and think. So don't try hard to fill the silence when you're speaking with someone. Silence also builds rapport with someone. In that, because we do get an opportunity to just slow down and see what I'm thinking and feeling right now. In a crisis, people often don't know. And then the last thing goes along with silence, which is allow time for decisions. If you give somebody an option, don't expect them to make a decision right now. You need to tell me right now what you're going to do. That just escalates things, right? Just asking that, you can see why someone would tense up and go, I can't. So allow time to think about it. And it's okay to take a break. So you might talk about, one of the things that I think about is you might talk about what are the options that you're going to do, or that you're going to give this person, and you've given them the options. And then you might say, let's take a few minutes and think about that. And see what, you know, just take a minute and think about that. Maybe get some water, or just sit quietly for a few minutes and decide what to do. Give them time to reflect and make the decision that's best for them. One of the things I'll say throughout is, remember, they're the expert in their life. Even in a crisis, you're just a resource. So you're there to support them. But they're the expert. Okay. So I found that to be really helpful to remember that as I work with people that are suicidal. Even in the crisis, they're the expert. The best thing to do in a de-escalation situation is calm down, take a breath, and do the things that can be helpful. Another thing you might ask a person in a crisis, a suicidal crisis or any kind of crisis, is what would be helpful for you right now? What can I do that would be helpful? Maybe it's just listen. Don't give me any advice. I don't want to hear anything from you. Just listen to me for a few minutes. Okay, that's doable. That's definitely doable. So be ready to do what you can to assist the person in getting back to that more normal state. Remember, most likely the crisis has been building for a while. Crises rarely happen, you know, in just quickly. Sometimes they do, but most of the time they've been building. When we come in to de-escalate a crisis, it's usually at the middle of the crisis or the highest part of the crisis. And then after that, after some time, that begins to sort of go back down to that normal state again. And that can take days, weeks, hours. But it's that idea that we're seeing them when we see someone in a crisis like this, whether it's suicidal or any other kind of crisis, we're seeing only a small portion of their life. And we're seeing them on the worst day of their life. So do everything you can to provide empathy and caring and love for this person at this particular moment. These are always good things to remember when we're talking about suicide. So I'm going to do a quick vignette with you. I was going to do breakout sessions, but let's just do it as in the chat. What would you do? The question is, what would you do with Mary? And I'll read it. Mary is a client you've been working with for several months. She's quiet. Mary is quiet, shy, and soft-spoken. Mary takes great pleasure in having a neat and inviting home and is always neatly dressed for your visits. Over the last few weeks, you've noticed that Mary seems distant and their appearance has changed. They appear sullen, tired, and agitated. Mary's house is messy. Mary appears unkempt and has not showered or changed clothes in several days. Over the last few visits, it has been hard to engage Mary. When asked questions, Mary doesn't respond or responds in an angry, combative tone of voice. Today, you're meeting with Mary. When you arrive, Mary is agitated and pacing. You notice the house is dirty, dishes are stacked in the sink, mail is stacked on the table, and the floors are littered with debris. Mary is wearing the same clothes they had on last week. Mary will not sit down and keeps pacing. You try to engage with Mary, but they seem not to hear you. You're worried. What de-escalation techniques might work in this situation? So in the chat, just sort of brainstorm, what might you do to help Mary right now? What are some of the things that maybe we've talked about or that you've tried and work in these kinds of situations? Okay. Yeah, good one, Marina. Assess for your own safety first, exit strategies if needed, always in a crisis. I didn't mention that, but very good. That's really important. So I'm glad. Thank you, Marina, for bringing that up. What else could you do for Mary? Yeah, ground yourself, don't move a lot, open stance. Yes, open body language. Absolutely. If you think of anything, let's see, Natalie says, I would stay silent for a moment if not hearing me and then ask about her experience when she notices me. Yeah, good. Excellent. Excellent. Yeah. Good. So we can continue to think about this, but because of time, I want to go ahead and move on. So thank you for that. All of those things are great things. The thing I think of with Mary is sort of that same thing about just sort of waiting for her to acknowledge me, that I'm there, and then maybe speak to her about what's been going on. See if I might be able to, after a few minutes, get her to sit down and talk with me. Just find out what's going on, what's happened. Okay. All right. So let's talk about suicide, and all of us have a role to play in suicide. One of the questions that I was actually going to move you into breakout groups, but we don't have time for, is what is suicide prevention? And you've in the chat prior, You've mentioned several things that are suicide prevention: housing, medical care. What other things are suicide prevention when you think about suicide prevention? Anybody have anything they want to put in the chat about that, or unmute and just say is fine too? Community, absolutely. That's a big part of suicide prevention is community. Connectedness to others, absolutely. Building a trusting relationship, yeah. Creating a safe space and getting someone, yes, absolutely. Socialization, gender affirmation, medications and surgery is desired by trans and non-binary folks. Oh, Kim, that's huge. That is huge. Acceptance, regular practical things, money to pay bills, housing, yeah. All of those things are suicide prevention. Sometimes when we look at that, we think about the only thing we think about is saving someone's life. That's part of suicide prevention for sure. Narcan, absolutely. But suicide prevention is a much bigger topic than just that. Normalize feelings of sadness. Yes, when Niki was talking about that hopelessness, those feelings can be exacerbated by all of these things that we're talking about. The lack of most of these things. Absolutely. That's all suicide prevention. So it's important to keep that in mind when we talk about what is suicide prevention. Acknowledging someone's value and worth. Absolutely. Normalizing feelings of sadness. Healthy access to food. Creating safe environments by not having access to lethal means. Having access to mental health treatment and substance use treatment. Advocating. Our job as providers and as helpers might be to advocate for supportive policies from our political officials. That includes jails, schools, and the healthcare system. Culturally appropriate therapeutic approaches. Problem solving. Yeah, especially among machismo men, normalize expressing one's feelings, even if it via toxic mindset makes one look weak. Yeah, that's a huge one, Alexander. Thank you. These are all the things that is suicide prevention. All of these things help us to help our clients as well. If we know that our clients need basic needs, then that's suicide prevention. We can't talk about the higher level stuff like hopelessness and intent and all of those things if our client is hungry and has no clothes or no place to live. So it's those basic things that we need dealt with often first, before we can really begin to delve into all of the other things that might be going on in someone's life. We can't solve all of those problems. That's where the advocacy becomes so important for folks. There are risk factors for suicide. So now we know what suicide prevention is. What are some of the risk factors? Let me give you just a little bit of information that I found as I was beginning to work on this workshop. I don't like statistics very much, but I would like to share these with you when we talk about how important is this really. There are approximately 38 million people who have HIV/AIDS worldwide, and they're more likely to have suicidal thoughts and die from suicide than members of the general population. Some estimates 100 times more likely. Part of that is that they have okay, let me gather my thoughts for a moment. What's important about that for us to understand is that folks that are experiencing suicidal thoughts are many folks who experience suicidal thoughts can also then go on to take their life. Some don't, most don't, but there are those that do. HIV/AIDS, the stigma associated with HIV/AIDS, advancing disease, neurological changes that go along with the disease, and societal stigmas are some of the reasons why folks with HIV/AIDS are at greater risk for suicide. They also found in the study, and the study was done in 2021, that people being treated with antiviral therapy were less likely to die by suicide, and less likely to have suicidal ideation. So those are some of the risk factors when we look at the population that you're serving for the most part. So it's important to keep that in mind. Okay. So some of the other risk factors that are both for this population and the general population, there's nothing surprising here, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time. The loss of health is really important because that can be an indicator that someone is at higher risk. Risk does not mean someone's going to take their life. It just means that they have higher risk. The truth is, most of us have risk factors for suicide in our lives. Mental illness is a risk factor. It's often not the reason why someone kills themselves, though. In a recent study, 54% of people who died by suicide did not have a known mental health disorder at the time of their death. Known being the key word. So that's, that's important to keep in mind. What's more important than you knowing risk factors, though, is knowing the warning signs. And warning signs are things that are happening in the present that indicate someone is at risk for suicide. I'll move this along. The most common warning sign, the one that I want you to pay attention to, is when someone talks about suicide. When they decide when they say to you, I want to kill myself. I don't want to be here anymore. I want to die. I can't go on anymore. Okay. That hopelessness is part of this. They may feel that they're trapped or in unbearable pain. They may have an increased use of drugs or alcohol. They may seem more agitated. They may have extreme mood swings from being really, really depressed to being almost elated. And we're not talking about bipolar disorder. We're just talking about these changes in mood that can happen. Okay. The most important one is talking about wanting to die or take their life. Okay. That's the most important risk factor or warning sign for suicide. So what do you do? How can you help? These are the 5 steps that we're going to go over next. Okay. I'm going to play this video. I know we're short on time, but this really talks about all 5 steps. So hopefully the video will be okay. And I hope you can hear it and everything. So I'm going to go ahead and play it now.
Hi, I'm Nick Offerman. Thanks for joining me and the good folks at the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. Most of us would take action if we knew someone close to us was thinking about suicide, but many of us don't know what to do. Here are 5 steps to take to be the one to help save a life. Warning signs of a suicidal crisis include extreme changes in mood, sleeping habits, and increased drug or alcohol use. Someone might talk about feeling hopeless or like a burden to others. If you notice these signs, ask directly, are you thinking about suicide? Studies show that asking about suicide does not increase suicidal thoughts or actions. Being there means helping a person in crisis feel less alone. Be present and calm. Try not to judge. Listen to their reasons for being in pain and help them focus on reasons for living. If you can't be there in person, connect by phone, text, or video. Keeping someone safe means putting time and distance between them and any means they could use to hurt themselves. Work with them to remove dangerous objects or offer to hold on to them until the crisis has passed. Ask, do you have a plan to harm yourself? What's the timing? How would you do this? When lethal means are made less available, suicide rates by that method decline. Help someone with thoughts of suicide connect with others and support resources. Develop a safety plan together with ways to recognize when they are in a crisis, actions they can take if they feel desperate or overwhelmed, and individuals and services to contact when a crisis occurs. After taking these 4 steps, visit, call, or text in the days and weeks to come. Ask, how are you today? Is there anything you need? Even simply reaching out is proven to help reduce the risk for suicide. When someone we know is struggling to cope, we can ask, be there, keep them safe, help them connect, and follow up. These 5 actions can help not only prevent suicides, but also build a more connected and compassionate world.
Okay. Nick Offerman went over everything I was going to say, so that's really helpful since we're out of time.
I'm Nick Offerman.
Sorry. But I want to take a minute to reiterate a couple of things as we wrap up here. One is that it's okay to ask about suicide. You're not going to make someone more suicidal by asking them the question, are you thinking about killing yourself? Are you thinking about taking your life? Have you ever felt so sad that you just wanted to disappear? Those are ways people might talk about it. The best way to ask is your way to ask. Ask, don't hesitate. And then you need to follow up with that ask by finding out a few other things, just like the video said. Do you have a plan? Have you thought about how you take your life? Do you have the means for suicide? How they answer those questions are really important as far as, I'm going to skip this. Is really important to be able to help us determine the level of risk that someone is asked. So asking about a plan, the more thought out it is, the more details they have figured out about the plan, like when they're going to kill themselves, where they're going to do it, how they're going to do it, tell us how much risk they are. Whenever you're in doubt about how much risk someone is in, you can always call 988. And they can tell you, the crisis center that you're routed to will help you determine risk. We have a risk lethality scale that we use. And as you can see, it's simple, 0 to 5, 0 being no risk and 5 being the risk that we would have to put someone in the hospital. The 5 is someone who's actively suicidal, has a plan, is usually alone. They have the means and they have already made a gesture or are about to. This is when, and they have no ambivalence. This is when emergency personnel should be called, or they should be taken directly to the hospital. High risk is someone who has thoughts of suicide, a strong desire, has a plan, strong intent, very little support, and very little ambivalence. This is, again, someone who very likely should probably be not left alone or taken to the hospital. Considerable risk, they have a desire for suicide, they have thoughts, they have a plan, they have access to the mean, but they have wavering ambivalence. Okay, so that's someone that we could work with. Some risk, again, someone we could work with. Very little risk, someone that we could work with. This is just one scale for this. It's just information. You'll have a copy of the slides in the handouts, and you'll also have a copy of a safety plan, and then I'm really going to be quiet. The safety plan is a way to help them connect, and it's very self-explanatory what it looks like. It's just giving them places where they can go for help and who they can reach out to and things that they can do. I'm sorry that I ran out of time, which is not unusual for me, actually, running out of time. Are there any questions really quickly that I can answer for you? I know we're over. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. The video, I'm not sure if you'll be able to get it, if it'll come through on the PDF. I think it will.
Oh yeah, it's not on the PDF, but what we can do, Cris, is put the link. I'll add the link to the handout or to the website so you guys can see the video. The recording of the training will be on the webpage. It'll just take some time for Jessica to download it, and then we'll upload it to YouTube, to our YouTube channel. So yes, the recording of the training will be there, and we'll get the link to the video. Cris, is that in there somewhere? The link
I
to-
can send it to you. I can send
Okay.
you the link. Okay.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank
Kim, as far as protective factors are concerned, you'll know those better. I didn't talk about them specifically. Those are really the things you're going to work on the safety plan. Those are the people that they can call for help. Those are the places where they feel connected to community. Those are their religious or spiritual beliefs. Those are the places they can go where they feel safe. And working with those, I think of that as working with the safety plan. Okay. Because of time, just to let you know, you can always contact me directly. I'm always willing to answer questions or have a conversation to be, any way I can support you. So just feel free to reach out. Yeah, my phone number and my email address are there. And you can also reach out to our director, which is Mercedes Coleman, if you'd like to. Thank you all for being here, and thank you for letting me go over. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Cris. Big thanks to Cris on some very practical information on how to assess folks, and also and help folks, support people through some tough times. So I just want to really end with some big thanks to Cris and Niki for leading our trainings today, to Ramon for leading our healing practice, ZJ, Jessica, Sammy for managing the overall chats and also the overall Zoom, and Megan for taking notes. And really want to reiterate what Cris and Niki have talked about, and Ramon have taught us around taking good care of yourself. That is very, very important for us to do that so that we can be present for others as well. So really grateful for your courage and commitment, sticking with us today and supporting our communities around crisis prevention, mental wellness. And just want to really reiterate that you are also not alone. There's lots of folks here that are amazing and want to help and want to support each other. So just really grateful for all of you for being here and keeping us connected. So thank you so much. And just a reminder to please do the evaluation. We are dependent on that to continue doing the trainings, and really want to hear from you, your genuine, candid feedback, so we can make them better as well. So I'm just going to stop sharing so that you can all see each other as we end the workshop. Thank you so much, everyone. Really appreciate you all.
Thank you.